Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to this channel if you are new. So this is going to be part 4 of my 240ToWin series, and in today's video I will be talking about primary races for the first time in this series. In the first video I talked about the 10 safe states for either party, meaning that there will be no competitive or key races to watch for either the general election or primary elections in those states. And then I talked about Alabama, the competitive House race happening there in the general election, and then I talked about why we should be looking at the results in the presidential election in Mississippi this fall. Now I am moving to the state of Indiana, where there are some key primaries happening this coming Tuesday on May 7th, in just a couple of days. And there are 7 primaries where the results are very important for what kind of Republican we get nominated for each office and for each race. So we're going to jump into those to give you a brief overview of each so you can have an idea of who the best conservative Republican is in each race to see who is the best choice to win in each primary. So 6 of these 7 primaries that I will be talking about are happening for House seats in Indiana. There are 9 congressional districts, and 6 of them are competitive to varying degrees this year. The first primary to talk about is in the 1st district. It is currently held by the Democratic incumbent Frank Mervyn, who narrowly won re-election in 2022. And it is important to see what Republican will be the nominee against him to make sure that he has a good shot to go down, especially in a presidential year where turnout will be up and enthusiasm among conservative Republican voters to get out and vote will be also through the roof, with Donald Trump on the top of the ticket, energizing them to go to the polls. So if we scroll down to the Republican primary, we can see that the lead candidate is Randy Niemeyer, who is the Lake County Councilor, one of the counties in the district, and also the chair of that county Republican Party. And looking at his issues page, if you can look him up on Google online for yourself, he's pretty solid and has pretty good funding numbers. As we can see here, he's raised about $400,000 compared to his opponents that have only raised a couple $1,000s. He has the endorsement of some key people and some key groups on the conservative and Republican side of the aisle. I think he would be a solid choice, especially given his position in the district of a city councilor in Lake County, which is the second most populous county in the entire state. So the Republican candidate's performance in that county will be key in the general election. So I think he would be a solid recruit and a solid nominee for the seat to take on Frank Mervyn, and I hope he takes the top spot in the primary. Now moving on to our second primary to watch, we move to the 3rd district. Jim Banks, the current incumbent for the seat, is retiring to run for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate seat in Indiana, which is up for election this year, which we'll also be touching on in a few minutes. Jim Banks is a solid conservative and has had a pretty decent voting record in Congress. So while it is positive to see someone like him running for Senate, someone that's more conservative when most Senate Republicans tend to be much more establishmentarian and neoconservative, you want to see someone just like him, as conservative as him, maybe even more, be his replacement in this seat. So we can see the choices here, a lot of Republicans running. And if we scroll down here, the best Republican, in my opinion, is Marlin Stutzman. He is the former representative for the seat, actually. As we can see here, he was the U.S. representative for the seat from 2010 to 2017, and he ironically did not run for re-election to run for the Senate, but lost in the primary. So he's now running again. He's been endorsed by the House Freedom Caucus, the Family Research Council, which is a really, really conservative group. I think of all the options, he would definitely be the most solid, so I hope that he wins in the 3rd district. He would be a solid replacement for Banks. Now, if we go to the 4th district, our 3rd primary to watch in the state of Indiana, Jim Baird is the incumbent representative in this seat. And he is not the worst Republican in the world, but he is kind of a milquetoast Republican at best. Does not have the most outstanding voting record, you might say. And his main challenger is Charles Bookwalter, who is really solid on the issues. I'll explain more on that in a minute. But if you look at the funding here, James Baird, the incumbent, has only spent a little over $200,000 on this primary race, whereas Charles Bookwalter has almost spent $100,000, as we can see right here by this figure. So he's doing pretty well at keeping up with spending against the incumbent, which is very impressive. And he is a small business owner, a former Green Beret in the United States Armed Forces, and really, really solid in the issues, whether it be foreign wars, border security, or healthcare, which is really something that is not common for Republicans to be good at. They are usually missing in action on the issue. So whether it be vaccine mandates, holding pharmaceutical companies accountable, or just making our healthcare system better, I think he would bring some fresh ideas and a much better conservative voting record to Congress in this seat. So I hope that Bookwalter pulls off the upset against Jim Baird in this primary race. Now moving over to the 5th district. The incumbent in this seat, Victoria Sparks, initially announced that she was going to retire at the end of her term and not run for re-election. This February, she announced that she was actually going to run for re-election and reversed that decision. She's the only member of Congress that actually was born in Ukraine. And she initially supporting Ukraine and giving them aid, but has since slowly walked back that decision and become much more skeptical of Ukraine and very outspokenly critical of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and alleging corruption in the Ukrainian government and misuse of funds that we are providing them to fight the war against Russia. So much so that she started voting against aid packages to Ukraine and voted against the big foreign aid bill to Ukraine that passed last month in April. She also has a solid voting record on most other issues, especially immigration. So if I were in this district, I would definitely vote to give her another term over her primary challengers, and I hope to see her win renomination in this seat. Now we move over to the 6th district, another Republican retirement in the seat. Greg Pence, Mike Pence's brother, is the current incumbent, and he is retiring from this seat and not running for re-election after being first elected in the 2018 midterms, so only served a couple of terms. Now there are two candidates that I like in this seat actually. Jamison Carrier, who has never held political office before in his life and has been endorsed by Vivek Ramaswamy. And there's also Mike Speedy, who is the state representative for the 90th district in the Indiana State House of Representatives. And he has also been endorsed by some good people, the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group, Indiana Right to Life, and both Carrier and Mike Speedy have fundraised pretty well. Jamison Carrier has raised $850,000, and Mike Speedy has raised over $1.3 million in this race. Now, they're running against Jefferson Shreve, who has raised $4.5 million in this race, outraised both of them combined. But he seems to me to be a little bit more of a moderate candidate. We can see here that he ran to be the mayor of Indianapolis in 2023, being a former city councilor of Indianapolis. So in such a Republican seat as Indiana's 6th congressional district, you really want someone to be a little more conservative in this seat. So I hope either Jamison Carrier or Mike Speedy win and get the nomination. Now moving down to the 8th district, the final House primary that we will be looking at, the incumbent Larry Bucshon is the 3rd Republican retirement in the Indiana House delegation. And he was not good. He was a pretty mediocre congressman, to say the least. So it's definitely a net positive that he's retiring to hopefully get someone a little bit better in there. Now, Mark Messmer is running for this seat, and he has the endorsement of some key people, and he is the former majority leader in the Indiana State Senate. And he is kind of the leading candidate in this seat. He's raised the most money, raising over $750,000, but he's really not that good. His issues page is pretty underwhelming. And he also supported a bill that would give illegal immigrants driver's license in the state. Like, really? That's your conservative option in this seat? So for that reason, I support Richard Moss, a doctor and has been a candidate for the district several times in the past, has not been able to pull out a victory for the nomination, but I hope he does this time because he's pretty conservative and a much better option on paper than Mark Messmer. And he also hasn't done too bad as far as fundraising. He has the 2nd highest fundraising number at over $550,000. So I hope that he can pull out the nomination in the seat. I think he'd be much better, and I think Mark Messmer is a rhino waiting to happen in Congress. Now, the final primary in the state of Indiana happening this coming Tuesday that we need to talk about is for the governor race. And this is a really interesting and unique one that's happening. Mike Braun, the incumbent U.S. Senator in Indiana, only has served one term there. He won election to a first term in 2018, but now is choosing not to run for re-election and is running to be the next governor of the state of Indiana. And he has been one of the best senators as far as voting records go in the United States Senate on the Republican side. And that's not saying much because there are many lackluster senators in the GOP. but he still has been very, very good. He was one of the most outspoken Republicans against extreme COVID restrictions and the vaccine mandates. He's very socially conservative. He is just very good on a wide array of issues. He did have a pretty poor response to the Black Lives Matter riots and protests in 2020, that after being chided and challenged and debated by Tucker Carlson on his show back in the day, he did change his tune. He did listen to his constituents. So there's still something to be said for that. And he's running against Suzanne Crouch, who is the current lieutenant governor of Indiana. And she's really just a run-of-the-mill establishment Republican, really does not bring anything new to the table, in my opinion. I think Mike Braun would be a much more conservative option to be the next governor of Indiana. And we can see his endorsements are pretty solid. He got the Club for Growth PAC endorsing him, which is a conservative political action committee. And Donald Trump, he got that endorsement to be the next governor of Indiana, while Suzanne Crouch got Greg Pence, Mike Pence's brother, and Larry Bouchon, who I said was the retiring incumbent representative for the 8th District in this state, and is really mediocre. So you kind of can see just by those two endorsements that she's more aligned with the establishment wing of the party. The current governor of the state of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, is pretty mid. He's really not that good. He had a really poor response. He had a way worse response than Mike Braun did to the riots in 2020, and he was really, really weak on the vaccine mandates. He only got pushed to the right by the state legislature, and she is really kind of the same cloth of Eric Holcomb. I really think Indiana deserves a much more conservative governor than Eric Holcomb currently is, and Suzanne Crouch would be. So for that reason, I think Mike Braun would be a great governor of the state of Indiana. And if we look at the polling here, he currently leads by a pretty wide margin. He got 44% in the most recent one, which is a month ago. So it's not much to go on. Things could have changed, and there's still 26% undecided. So this still could be closer than expected, but hopefully Mike Braun pulls it out. He is definitely favored. And for the campaign fundraising numbers, Mike Braun has actually been outspent and outraised by Brad Chambers running in the seat, who's actually raised about $400,000 more than he has. Although Mike Braun has actually outraised Suzanne Crouch by a whopping margin. She got $8.1 million. He has almost $12.5 million. But Brad Chambers, we can go back up here a little bit to explain who he is. He is the former Indiana Secretary of Commerce, as we can see right here. I'll just highlight that so you can see it. And he just, again, like Suzanne Crouch, does not bring much to the table, seems definitely much more of a establishment run-of-the-mill Republican. I think Mike Braun is the best option. It's unusual to see a sitting senator, retire and run for the governorship of that state that he represents, but this is the case here. And I think he's a really solid option for governor, and I hope he gets the nomination. And we can go over to our map over here and update it by putting Indiana in the column, a state with some races to watch. But Indiana is definitely not a battleground state. There will be some general election races to watch and pay attention to. I'll touch on those in a future video once the primary elections have been decided. But as talked about in this video, there are actually a lot of important primary races happening in the state. And if the most conservative option prevails in the majority of those 7 primaries happening on Tuesday, that will be a very, very good thing for the conservative movement and for Donald Trump in a potential second term to have much more conservative allies surrounding him to more effectively and completely pass his agenda.